in power. Thank you, Trina. So one of the most asked questions we get, and I'm Molly, I'm a director of organizing in Detroit at 482 Forward, but this is across the state. We get is, what about the lottery money? Like, why do schools need money? I see all those billboards around like how much money we get from the lottery. And the reality is we don't get that much money from the lottery, and our schools have a $4.5 billion gap. So it's both, we need to raise new money and have a say in how money is spent. And Alex is going to talk a little bit about this too.
Yes, I am. So today is the fourth training in our series about School Funding 101. And this one is obviously about at-risk students and their funding, and then funding for mental health services in schools. Just so everyone knows, I've got like a funky screen thing going on here. So if you're raising your hand or you have something that you want addressed as I'm talking, I probably won't be able to see you, but if you put a question in the chat, either someone from MEJC will answer or we'll make sure that we get to it at some point. And we're going to have a couple of breakout rooms today, including in just a minute. So hopefully we'll make sure that we get like everyone's questions answered. And we'll also have some time at the end to kind of talk about whatever we feel like we need to. All right, so I think we're probably good to get going with our first little breakout session.
And Rochelle or Trina, you can make me host if you want, so I can do breakouts, so you don't have to, whoever the host is. So while they're doing that,
so while you guys are in your breakouts, introduce yourself to the other people who are randomly assigned to your breakout room, and talk about some things that you are hoping to learn from today, some questions that you have about mental health or at-risk funding. And then if one person in every group can kind of keep track of the main questions and then put them in the chat when we return, that would be awesome, so that I can make sure we cover them through the slides. And if it's something that we're not going to cover, that we can make sure that we get that answered for you. Just
yeah,
brainstorming about why we are here.
So what are you hoping to learn, and what questions do you have? Open to all the rooms, head on over.
All right. So while you guys are putting your stuff in the chat, we have a beautiful pie chart up on the screen. So this is a chart of all of the stuff that the education budget pays for. So as you guys can see over on the right-hand side, almost half of the funding, the biggest piece, is that per pupil funding. So you guys might have heard that like each student gets a certain dollar amount kind of attached to their head, and then their school district gets that dollar amount for that kid showing up. This year, that amount is $9,608. The state sets the level of that per pupil amount each year. And so that's what that and use voice commands while driving. If you look at the two slices of the pie, are like kind of around 10 o'clock-ish. They are, what colors are they? Orange and light blue, I think. You will see the school safety and mental health funding and the at-risk funding. I guess the at-risk funding is kind of over at, do you see it, Molly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there you go. Molly's got it. So the at-risk funding is 4.6% of the pie, and the school safety and mental health funding is 2.2%. So those percentages might sound like they're not a lot. However, the entire school budget is $24 billion. So it still is a lot of money, even though the percents are, you know, a lot smaller than things like the MIPSR's retirement system and stuff like that. So we're going to start with talking about at-risk funding today. So what the heck does at-risk mean? Oh, and we have questions in the chat. I'm excited. Okay.
Oh. What's the
So
right slide?
these are the 10 categories that can qualify a student as being at risk. And so when we're saying at risk, we mean that they have some sort of a characteristic that would make it so that it will be statistically more difficult for them to graduate high school. So things that qualify a student at risk would be if they're economically disadvantaged, which is determined by if they qualify for free and reduced lunch. We use that as a proxy for that. If they are English language learners, victim of child abuse or neglect, if a student is pregnant teen or she's a teen parent, or they are a teen parent, family history of school failure, incarceration, substance abuse, immigrants within the last 3 years, If a student is chronically absent, that's defined as missing over 10% of a school year. If a student is continuing high school after their initial 4 years. And then we have some proficiency things. So if a student does not test at proficiency specifically in math or reading on the state test, or if a student does not test at proficiency on some sort of local assessment in math and English, then those students are kind of all considered at risk. And every school district fills out the same piece of paper. They just have to kind of log student name, what their characteristic is, and then they qualify as at risk. So we know that these students require more funding. They need more sources, more resources in order to get an adequate education. Molly, you can go to the next slide. So what we do in the state of Michigan is that we give every student that per pupil dollar amount that I talked about. And then students who are at risk receive an additional dollar amount on top of that percentage for being at risk. And so we call this weighted funding. And so you might hear that kind of thrown around. Michigan is moving towards more of a weighted funding model. It is more equitable. It's something that people like Molly and me and for our organizations are supportive of. And so I gave a little example here of how a weighted funding model can work. So if we pretend like every student is going to get $10,000 for their per pupil amount, and then we have a weight of 22%, that means that that student's total funding that goes to their district is $12,200 per pupil. So that's kind of how a weighted funding model works. And there are other things in the school budget that are weighted. For example, English language learners get an additional weight for their extra needs that they have. What else is weighted?
There's a few questions in the chat that might be helpful.
No, there's what is per pupil, per kid. So every student enrolled in a district who shows up on count day.
There's also questions, who identifies students as at risk, and is it possible a school can have 100% at risk students?
Sure, they could have 100% at risk, I suppose. They only have to have one of those characteristics correct to qualify as at risk. I can answer some of that after some of the mental health stuff. Is there anything else that I need to cover here?
I don't think a hand went down, but I think they're going to put it in the chat.
Okay. This mental health stuff I'll definitely get to. Molly, there's a question about the lottery.
Ooh, what's the question about the lottery? Let's see.
Just where does it go? It goes into the budget. If we go back to that pie, it was actually, oh wait, it wasn't in there. I didn't have the revenue slide. Sorry.
No, I can pull it up.
It's 7% of the total budget. So some of the lottery money does go to the budget, but it's 7%. It's not like it, so it covers like one little slice. It'll cover one categorical. Okay, so let's say that a school has done their per pupil accounting. They know how many kids are in the district. They know how many students are receiving at-risk funding who qualify as at-risk. And yes, that might take a little bit of digging for districts. However, the most important thing to consider with at-risk funding really is economically disadvantaged students. And I say that because our at-risk funding is strictly determined by how many students qualify for free and reduced lunch. I'm not really sure why it works that way. I think it's just, I don't know. That's just how it works. We decide how many students are at risk, and then we use free and reduced lunch numbers to determine funding. Now, Michigan used to do something where every single at-risk student got the exact same weight. So if you were an at-risk student in Okemos, Michigan, or in Forest Hills Northern, or in Twickenham Falls, you all got the same weight. We have determined through research and common sense that students who are at risk or economically disadvantaged aren't all the same. So a student who is in a more affluent district with a much lower concentration of poverty does not need the same resources as a student who's in a school district with a very high concentration of poverty. And so just last year, we rewrote how we calculate at-risk funding. And it's something that we have started calling the Opportunity Index. Basically, this is a concentration of poverty formula. The higher concentration of poverty, the more money, the higher the weight at-risk students receive in a district. The opportunity index breakdown is all right here on the screen. It's kind of convoluted. The formula for determining exactly where a district falls and what their weight will be is a complex formula. The districts are responsible for figuring out exactly how much money, what percent of the weight, like what weight they get for their at-risk funding. But here's generally kind of how it works. So if you take a look at, let's say, opportunity index band 3, and you don't need to know what the bands are because they're really meaningless. Let's say your district falls somewhere between 44% economically disadvantaged and 58.99% of your students are economically disadvantaged. That means all the way over on the right-hand side that you would receive that each student's weight would be 12.23%. That's not exactly how it works. That's not totally accurate because each district receives a difference depending on where they are between that 44 and 58.99%. But for the sake of this conversation, like it's close enough. You'll also see that there's this little column here called goal weight. So when this passed in the budget last year and the legislature said, yes, let's change our formula so that the higher concentration of poverty districts will receive a higher weight, they put goal weights in statute. These are the weights that we would like to see, where if you have 85 to 100% of your students who are economically disadvantaged, you receive 47%. Your weight is 47% of that foundation or that per pupil funding. However, we don't have enough money to support that at this time. Therefore, the legislature decided that they would prorate the weights, and that's what's listed all the way on the right-hand side. And that is what we are currently living in. So depending on where your district falls on this chart in terms of percentage of economically disadvantaged students, your weight or the percent of the foundation each student gets, that percent of the per pupil amount, is all the way over on the right-hand side. What we would like to move towards, what the legislature said that we would use as goals, is listed under goal weight.
And there were some questions. There were some questions in the chat that now that every school gets free lunch, how does this impact how we measure school? Yeah.
That's a really good question. There's a lot of concern over that. So every student does get free and reduced lunch. However, it is still so important for parents to fill out the paperwork designating that they are economically disadvantaged for this exact reason. So even though every student has free lunch available for them or free meals available to them, it is still important that these forms get filled out so that districts know exactly this stuff so that they can get the correct funding. That is definitely a concern and an unintended consequence of the free and reduced meals for all students. Yeah.
So the other thing that we are trying to do, which is hopefully going to address part of that is, and we'll talk about this, is trying to have student level data be attached to tax records for parents. So we have more student level information, not just on students' parent reporting, which is making it harder. And I see some more questions.
Yeah, I've got one right here.
There's not, what does it mean to prorate? Yeah.
Yeah, the prorating the weight. So the goal weight is in statute. It is in the law saying that this is what these students deserve. This is what they should be funded at. But we do not have the money in the school budget to do that. Therefore, students are not receiving that goal weight this year. They are receiving the prorated weight. They're just receiving a lower weight because that's what we can afford. That's how much money is in the budget this year. And you can tell that those weights are much lower than what we would like to see in the budget.
Exactly. So prorate, when I prorate my rent and stuff, I still owe that money. They owe us money. Like, so do we get that money?
No. It's basically just saying we're going to work towards this. And it's up to us as advocates to hold the legislature accountable to working towards those goals.
It also, this is also very expensive. So in this model, one limiting factor is that our state actually doesn't have the money to meet these weights, to be frank. I mean, we have a $4.5 billion gap to meet some of the that we still need to get to for some of the weights, but if we actually implemented this opportunity index, it would probably be closer to $10 billion a year extra we needed to get. So
Yeah.
that's a factor of school funding too.
That's what I was going to ask. If we got what we were asking for in terms of the prorate, how much is that per student? If we did have the money, what does that come out to be with that full 40, whatever it is, 40 something percent?
Well, you'd have to calculate it differently every year based on the base per pupil amount. So this year, the amount is 9,608. And then let's say we want to know what 39% of that is. That's $3,000. $3,747. So that student, instead of getting $9,608, if you were under band 4, underlined 4, that student would be getting $13,355. So
Okay.
if you were living in that
Wow.
district, I mean, it's a ton. Yeah.
Yeah. What a difference. Okay, thanks.
So yeah, we would love for those goal weights that are in statute to be our reality, but they're not, literally, because the state does not have enough money. We just don't have it.
I have a question.
Good question, Denise. Go ahead.
Who, me?
Whoever said that, Joanne.
I said that. I said that. I really don't understand. It seems like I said this before. I tried to put it in the chat. I don't know if it came out clearly, but we're always asking for money, more money, and are these programs being effective? And secondly, it seems like the number of kids who need it are getting greater in the problems with what's going on. And I don't think it's always about money. I really don't. I think there's a lot of creative problem-solving people who can, think and be problem solvers and thinkers that can really develop programs that are going to be really effective. And, it's always about money. How come it's not being used effectively? I don't understand that,
So this is Perry. I'm just gonna, you guys don't mind if I just pipe up, there's like tons of research that actually shows how the relationship of investment in public education actually results in better outcomes. And I could dig around and see if I can find that and link it out. Of course, it's not just about money, and you have to have other pieces that I think are important to talk about, but it absolutely does matter. And the research is really clear on that. And Michigan's disinvestment in public education has placed us at the bottom of achievement. So it's not a coincidence. So
Yeah, I would say
and
that-
Joanne, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
That's a
Carrie.
couple of really good points. Is that number one, we do know from research that there is a causal effect between funding schools properly and students graduating on time and all sorts of other outcomes in terms of their life, including staying out of prison, not getting pregnant as a teen, et cetera, et cetera. And these links between money and outcomes, like I said, are causal. They're not correlational. And it can be proven through econometrics, which has been done over and over through the research. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think is hard to grapple with is the fact that Michigan has been disinvesting in public education for decades. That this is a problem now that started 20 years ago with tax cut after tax cut after tax cut that has caused our education system to be so severely underfunded that getting back to where we need to be is going to cost a ton of money. And it's also hard to kind of understand the fact that we are living in a problem now that was started 20 years ago. I wish I had that graph again, Molly. I'll try and pull it up at the end. It shows state funding for public education, all 50 states, and Michigan is in red. And just
I think I can find it too once we're done
it's,
sharing.
yeah, Tanner's favorite graph. my favorite graph of Tanner. So, okay. And yes, we will get to mental health, promise. Okay, let's go on to the slide that's up here. But I gotta get it up on my screen so I can read it. All right, so here's what all of that at-risk funding can be used for. There's a ton of things it can be used for. But the kind of anchor and what schools have to prove that they're using the money for is to support literacy and numeracy. So specifically to get reading by grade 3 at proficiency and math by the end of grade 8 at proficiency. And the reason that those two things are chosen is that those are proven in research to be kind of the point of no return for students. So we know that students who are reading by the end of grade 3 are more likely to graduate on time and have all these positive outcomes. And it's specifically by the end of grade 3. Programs to improve attendance and that go towards providing college and career readiness are all things that are supported by this at-risk funding. Another thing that started when I was a teacher, so I want to say maybe around 2015, is this thing called multi-tiered systems of support. So you may see or hear the phrase MTSS being thrown around when talking about school districts. And this is something that all school districts in the state of Michigan have to move towards, is a MTSS model. So what this means is that's that picture over on the side, that there are 3 different tiers of support for students. All students in the school receive tier 1 supports. So this would be me as a teacher teaching in my classroom and providing all my students, you know, the lesson plan, the worksheet, my time, all sorts of things. The second tier would be targeted interventions for some students. So for example, when I was teaching essays, I would give my lecture, little group activities for teaching essays, and then I would notice that there's some students who just needed a little extra help. So for their thesis statements, I would give them 5-sentence starters. They could choose one and then they could go on from there. So that's a targeted intervention that some students may need. These interventions don't have to be academic. They can be behavioral or they can be some sort of mental health help. But those are kind of tier 2 interventions that are for some students. And then we have our tier 3 interventions, which are intensive interventions for 1 or a few students. So maybe 1 student needs to get pulled out of my class to go to counseling. That would be a tier 3 intervention. And the hope with a system like this is that by providing all students with tier 1 supports, so maybe all students are receiving some sort of survey that they take about mental health, or they're receiving some sort of training about anti-bullying. By giving all students these tier 1 supports, you will have fewer and fewer and fewer students who are in need of targeted interventions or those 2 and 3 supports. So kind of anything that falls under this MTSS framework is supported by at-risk funding. And then we have other non-instructional programs, like some medical things, some school-based health clinics, mental health services, and other intervention programs. Like let's say a school district wants to partner with an outside organization to come in and teach students about safety, or wants to train staff about how to better support students with ADHD. All of those kinds of things can be supported with at-risk funding.
We have 2 questions. Denise, or let's see, Karen and then Denise.
Hi, I did have a question about the Reading by 3 program. What is done in the event that if the child meets that milestone but shows some struggles, what happens with that student after that? The reason asking is my son he was able to meet the bare minimum, but after grade 3, he struggled a lot with reading. A lot. So much so that, but he was never qualifying for IEP or 504 services. What does that look like for a student who doesn't qualify for those extra supports, but absolutely shows the need to have those extra supports, I guess you can say?
So I don't have it in this presentation, but I can show you where I can show you where to find the information, and like if anyone on here has specific questions, feel free to email me if we don't get to things. But there are a lot of investments in the school aid in the budget specifically for reading. So a student like your son should be receiving some sort of targeted intervention, some sort of tier 2 resource for reading. School districts are required to test students throughout the school year to track their reading, and they are required to use that data to guide their practice. So it's something that they have to do. And so I'm not going to tell you what to do, but if it were my son, I would definitely be asking what sorts of tier 2 services he's receiving and what sort of interventions are available at the district.
I actually moved him from the district because they said he wouldn't get anything because he doesn't qualify for 504 or IEP. So the district that he was in saw like, hey, he should have been getting more support. How come he didn't? We'll take care of it. We just need your district to do the testing for us. Yeah, talk about pissed off. But that's always a huge frustration for me that it was under the radars for from 3rd grade until 8th grade, and then 9th grade. Surprise, we have all these issues. But I would still love that information because I know there's other parents who have the same concerns.
Yep.
Whose children are still in the district.
Yeah, because there is specific money schools are getting for reading interventions, like
Yeah.
specifically reading interventions.
Wow.
Let's go to Denise's question. Karen, thank you. Well, drop your email in the chat, first of all. Or to chat it to me. So we have it. And Denise, do you have a question?
Kind of more of a statement. So today's my first day on a call with you guys, so maybe this would be more of a question or a statement to the training for a school board meeting, because I'm coming from a twofold aspect, wondering about the funding for a program that we do have and how we could get that implemented in a school district. But then I'm also coming from a different aspect because I am a part of the Alliance Coalition of Healthy Communities and Pontiac Prevention. So my question would be, there's and it's not just the Pontiac School District. Every coalition that we talk to, there's throughout Oakland County, provides the substance abuse. That was one of your risk factors. They provide the mental health services. They provide the preventative measures, the vaping, all those things that we know that the kids are at risk. But to get into a school district is like we're trying to get into Fort Knox. So there's coalitions in every single community that offer these free services. And if the school districts don't have the money for them, then why are they making it so difficult for people who already have funding, aren't asking for anything, but coming to try to provide that information to those at-risk students? So I guess that was just a statement. I know you don't have an answer, but that's an issue as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Jerica, I'm with you. It's in reference to what Jerica's talking about. The problem I have is that you can't fault parents for doing what's best for their kids, but then of course school choice hurts communities, community schools. I understand completely. I have a kid. He's in a private school right now.
And then just one last question. My son is in a private school, but one last question. Also, like they said, the state of Michigan came up with those 10 choices. I think a big part of that's missing and that we're seeing more and more of in all the communities, especially in the community I'm from, but is violence, especially the children that have lost a loved one, a parent or something to violence, that is going to put them in at risk, all those other at-risk categories, but that's not even addressed there.
Yeah. I mean,
so
trauma. Yeah. Go ahead.
another thing to kind of think about with the at-risk funding is that like school counselors don't have a list of what kids are at risk on their desks, right? Like the school gets that money because they have so many students who supposedly need the resources, and then the school gets the money to pay for those resources. But it's not like anybody's checking a list, I wouldn't think, and saying like, oh, that student doesn't qualify as at risk, that student cannot receive this help. I think it's more of like hey, your concentration of poverty is this high, we can afford all of these services, and any kid that we recognize at needing those services can access them. I don't think that any like teacher or counselor or principal would even have access to know who is technically at risk. So it's more of just a way of estimating how much money a district needs to pay for extra supports for any students that are recognized as needing them. It's not such a, it's not super formulaic in how it's delivered to students. All right, are we ready to move on to school-based mental health?
Looks like Autumn wanted to jump in.
Go ahead.
And Autumn's on.
Yes, I've been on, but I was in transit. I think more of a question really, so I might be throwing us off. And I think maybe Molly or Trina could maybe help. So I'm just like listening to these questions and what the parents are saying. And so listening to what you're saying, Alex, is like they don't have a list of kids who are at risk. So if I'm a parent and it sounds to me that my child might meet some of those characteristics, like what do I do? Do I go to the school and then from the organizing standpoint, I feel like Oakland Forward, we need to have like a little handout that we give to parents, because I think parents don't even know that they can qualify for some of the stuff. So what do you do as a parent if your child you think meets these characteristics? How do we get the help we need?
What resources does your district have? What do you guys do for your students who are qualified as at risk? Or you could ask what your tier 2 and tier 3 interventions are.
Yeah.
So what do you guys offer? What do you provide? How can my kid access those resources? Those
Okay.
are probably the 2 questions.
And they wouldn't report those to the parent like, hey, we found that your child is at risk and this is what we're doing and we're all working together for a common goal.
It just totally depends on your district. Honestly, I taught in a super small rural district where it was very, I went to the grocery store and I was bombarded by 16 parents talking to me about whatever. And it was very easy for me to say, hey, your kid needs this. Let's do this, blah, blah, blah. It was such a small school, small district. In a bigger district, I don't know how that would run. It is just so different depending on your context.
But
Yeah,
definitely,
this is our Lisa. I'm sorry. I just wanted to chime in. I just want to just put this on the record. This is one of the most frustrating things for parents to hear. I appreciate this information. You're on the money. I just really hate that I didn't have some of this information, or parents didn't have this 15, 16, 17, 18 years ago. When a lot of people have started and have begun, and this is part of my gut frustration with this, because we're graduating kids through all of this. It's almost like somebody said to me today, you have to find out stuff on surprise. Oh, whoa, wow, I found that out by accident. I just really hate it. And I think, I think that we are probably the choir. I just want to know what everybody else is doing. Because if those of us who are in this work and organizing and fighting and screaming and, demanding all these things every day, I can't imagine the families that just want to go to work and keep the lights on and just have a good school to take I can't imagine what they're doing. Who are they asking? Where are they going to find this all out? I just wanted to just make that statement because this is the frustrating part of it all.
and Arlisa, I mean, it's even, you're coming from Detroit. I mean, there are significant at-risk dollars going to Detroit because like many students, we have and this, I would say probably Pontiac is similar for folks who are coming from Pontiac or districts that are significantly disadvantaged. You're going to have or low income, you're going to have a very high level of at-risk students. So a lot of those supports should be like system-wide. When we talk about chronic absence rates and tier 1 and tier 2 and tier 3 supports, like those actually should be available to almost every single student.
The only difference is, I will say to that, and yes, you're right. The only thing is, I guarantee you, parents don't know anything about it. That's what I'm saying. The average, this is not information that is publicly said in a student orientation, and maybe by school, maybe certain schools may be mentioning certain things, but these are the kinds of things that I think, especially parents that are in special ed, these are the kinds of things that I think parents can be empowered by and can benefit from once they have the right information ahead of time. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to pause just, Alex, if you want to get to the next 2 slides, and then we're going to open it up to questions, right? Okay.
I think, yeah, there's a few more slides. There's a few more in there. But yes, I would also like to say, I totally agree. It's why I quit teaching. It's why I went back to grad school. I didn't know any of this stuff until I was taking literally 900 level classes. I just caught a spelling error. And this is like my goal now, is to teach people how this stuff works so that things can get better. So I'm just really hoping that we are now on this things are going to get better side of life. But anyway, all right, here we go. School-based mental health services. So As we all know, we have an increasing need post-pandemic. We have 1 in 6 young people who have a diagnosed mental health disorder. Gun violence and suicide are now the leading causes of death for kids under the age of 18. It used to be car accidents, and it is wild that suicide has unfortunately topped that. Mental Health America ranks Michigan 35th in providing mental health services to youth. We also know that school-based services increase access and treatment, help students overcome barriers of transportation, stigma, access, all sorts of things. Meeting kids where they are and providing these services in schools not only increases student experience, but it increases their overall health.
Mhm.
So what are we doing about it? Unlike other areas, Michigan is actually a leader in providing school-based mental health resources in a couple ways. Mal, you can go to the next slide. There are 2 main line items in the school budget that support mental health funding. You go back one, sorry. The first is section 31 AA of the one with like the Scrabble pieces. You're going forward, back. One more. There you go. Thank you. So this section 31 AA of the School Aid Act is a total of $310 million in state funding for this year that we're living in right now. That funding is distributed on a per pupil basis, much like what we talked about earlier with, you know, each kid gets a certain dollar amount. So $310 million divided by the number of kids in the state. Schools are getting that money to spend on mental health and school safety. This year, 50% of those funds that school districts get have to be used for improving student mental health. They cannot all be used this year for school safety. This is a formula grant in the way that it is written. School districts have to opt in to receiving the money, so they're not automatically given the money like they are the per pupil foundation. So that is kind of an interesting little nugget. But yeah, so $310 million distributed per pupil. It's 31A funding. And the next slide is
school safety, just so folks are clear, the school safety piece is for like all of the technology, security
on the next slide.
materials. Oh, never mind.
It's on there.
Got it.
I got
You
you,
got it.
Molly.
There you go. There you go.
All right, so here's how that money can be spent. Schools can hire mental health professionals. This ranges anywhere from school psychs to social workers to counselors. Schools can purchase screening tools to help identify the needs of students. Training for school staff, consulting with outside providers or law enforcement. So that's all kind of mental health uses of this funding. School safety uses would be things like some facility upgrades like cameras, locks, doors, technology, things like that. Training staff and students on gun safety, paying for school resource officers, which we will talk about a little bit later in this presentation, and IT to manage cyberbullying, school violence, self-harm, things like that. So these are the things that this money can be spent on. Districts have to track it, and they do have to make sure that they're telling the state how they're using this money. Emily, that's a great question. I'll get there in a second. All right, this is the other pot of money in the School Aid Act that is directed towards mental health funding. This funding is older than the funding we just talked about, and it is different in a lot of ways. So this funding is $106.5 million, and we call this 31N funding for the line item that it is in the state, in the School Aid Act. This money is distributed to intermediate school districts. It used to be distributed equally across districts, so the legislature would decide how much money they would put into 31N, and then every one of the 56 ISDs would get the same amount of money. Now bigger ISDs or ISDs with more need get more money. So the goal of this funding is to expand the availability of mental health services to students without an IEP. That's important to know because before this funding, students with an IEP were already able to take advantage of some of this funding. So the goal was to expand it to all students. And the goal of this funding is mostly through hiring mental health professionals. The very kind of important, complicated thing about this money is that it requires Medicaid matching. So it requires intermediate school districts to participate in recouping Medicaid funds. That process is kind of complicated, kind of cumbersome. Medicaid's hard because it's both a federal and a state program. But I will say that the Department of Ed, Department of Health and Human Services, and other groups are very, very, very involved with helping intermediate school districts utilize this money. Before this 31N money, which is tied into a program called Caring for Students. So before this was available, students who had an IEP were receiving services, and schools could recoup Medicaid money for them. So they could recoup Medicaid matching for students with an IEP after this money. And then at some point in 2014, we decided that schools could recoup Medicaid matching for all students. And so that's when this money kind of came into play. Was the state said, hey, now that all students are allowed to receive services and schools can get Medicaid reimbursement for all students, we're going to also supply you with additional money to kind of help bolster providing these services in schools. So this goes to intermediate school districts, not individual school districts. So the big ISDs, so the 56 intermediate school districts, and requires some Medicaid matching. And it's about 1/3 of the funding that you saw with the 31AA funding.
Alex, there was a question around if they don't want to recoup Medicaid costs. I'm not sure.
They don't
Okay.
have to, but then they can't take advantage of this funding.
How do we know if a school district has applied for it?
So this one is for the ISD. So you'd have to figure out who your intermediate school district is and go to their website, and you can either ask them or you can look at their transparency funding and see if they have accepted any of it.
What do you mean when you say intermediate school district?
So Michigan has not only our local little school districts that everyone, that your kid goes to, but every school district is part of an intermediate school district, and there are 56 of them in the state. An intermediate school district is usually, they kind of are like county-wide, and they provide services for special education students. They provide services for career technical centers. So a lot of times if you think of like a career tech center that a bunch of schools send their kids to for training for culinary or working on like mechanic stuff, or ours had like it was before you become a nurse, they had some like medical training. So like career and technical training.
CNA school, yeah.
Those are usually run by intermediate school districts. Good. Okay. 31N, because it's been around for a while and it has this really great group of people, I really like them. It has this group of people who is really monitoring the funds. They put out legislative reports at the end of every year where you can find out how the funding is being used. So this chart is from the most recent legislative report that talks about where the funds are going, how they're being used, et cetera, et cetera. So if you look all the way over at the orange column, the top line is telling you how many local school districts have been served by this funding, how many school buildings have been served, students that attended a school with at least one provider that was hired by this funding. FTE is full-time equivalent, so that would be like a person who works in a school district for a whole day. So how many of those people are hired full-time by an ISD? And you can see it went up from being 90 to over 300. So in the course of this funding, it has been impactful in the sense of hiring providers to work in schools. And by providers, I mean mental health experts, and getting these services to kids. So you can kind of look and see that over time it has really increased. The funding's increased a lot. I think it was like 30 million the first year, and it's over 100 million now. But these are all the things that 31N specifically, 31N6 funds. That was a lot. That's all the like information I'm gonna throw at you before we talk about the proposed budget, how you can advocate, and I will share some resources for you if you're like, I still don't totally understand what an ISD is, I don't understand what per pupil funding is. I will share some resources with you guys to help. But before we do that, we're gonna go back into a breakout room for 5 minutes and decompress. What did you find surprising? What is still unclear or confusing that you need me to clear up? Or maybe someone in your group can clear it up. And then same thing as last time, one person in each group kind of take the questions that are still left over that we couldn't quite figure out, put them in the chat. Someone from MEJC or I will answer them.
All right, head to your breakouts, and there are
All
no
right.
dumb questions.
There are no dumb questions, and I'm actually going to join a room. this
It's
time,
hard.
so I'm
All
gonna
right,
I'm gonna go into room 8.
welcome back in the chat. Put in your questions. And then when Alex is back on, you can also, so put in your questions, anything that's surprising in your group, anything that's still unclear or confusing. And if you really got a confusing or unclear question, raise your hand and Alex can, we can take you one by one.
Harry.
Kyla from Benton Harbor and I were talking just about the transparency. This isn't really a question, but just like maybe a comment. And we actually like went to Benton Harbor's website and clicked that little button, you know, that says data transparency that every school district has, because I haven't done that in a long time. And we clicked on their budget, but it's really unclear. There's nothing that's like mental health, right? Like, so it's really hard to know where this money is going, and just would love to hear your guys' thoughts about, because I just feel like that's been coming up. Like, what do we do? Yeah, what do you think we should do to find out more? Like, or is there really a reason that school districts aren't reporting things out in
Yeah.
that level of detail? They don't have the staff to do it, or what is the deal?
Yeah, I don't want to, I'm not here to like totally defend schools by any means, but I will say that pupil accounting, so accounting for all the kids, what they need, where the money's going, blah, 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 is not an easy job. And a lot of school districts, especially small school districts, don't have the capacity for somebody for that to be their only job. Bigger school districts do. But a lot of times at local school districts, that relies on the superintendent
Yeah.
or the business manager. I would say that if you have a specific district in mind that you want to know, hey, what are you guys doing with this money? What services are you guys providing? I would 100% email the superintendent, school board, and if you have a like business official or a finance manager or something like that, those would be the people.
And I will say, I mean, Perry, this is to some of the work of MEJC funding committee that Perry's a co-chair of in Autumn. Is I think helping figure out, helping organizers and community activists and parents be able to navigate that complexity. Like we have researchers that we're working with. Like I often have to email Tanner, who's an economist, to like go and look at the state data system to pull that information. And so I think, we probably need to create some better transparency tools. But to Alex's point, I think the first step is the other people to go to are your unions. A lot of times if they're MEA, if you are an MEA district, you can go to your local or the state affiliate and we can help navigate that. Or if you're an AFT, same thing. They evaluate the spending for their contracts. So if you don't feel like you're getting adequate information from your business manager or superintendent or school board, that's another place to go.
Okay, there are a few other questions, but if we can kind of just like pause our brains for a second, turn towards some advocacy efforts, I'm going to get you guys some resources or show you where to find them. And then we can, of course, like get back to this. So I will try and do this in under 3 minutes. All right, the next slide is the Michigan's budget cycle. So let's start at the top at February. The governor releases her proposed budget for the next year. So she did that this year. She said in 2025, here's how much money I want to put into everything that we just talked about. And she does it for all of education and all the other budgets too. Then from February to April, the House and the Senate split up. They craft their own budgets kind of based on the governor's budget, and they come up with what they would like to see. So they do that from February to April, and then in April to May, it kind of moves through the House and the Senates. They have their final budget. They bring it together late May, early June, and they have to kind of merge the House and Senate budget and send that over to the governor. And then the governor has to merge the legislature's budget and her budget and sign it. Okay. While this is happening between February and April, people like Molly and Perry and me, we're talking to those education committees and we're saying, hey, this funding, really great, we need to continue it. Or we're saying, hey, the formula that we're using for special education funding, not good, not working. Here's what you should do instead, and here's why. And we hope that they listen to us, and because that's their job, and that they make those changes in the budget. So there's lots of advocacy going on when the education committees are meeting, and once it comes out of committee and it goes to the whole House or the whole Senate. This process is like brand new to me because I'm new-ish to this job. It's very interesting. I have found the legislature lovely to talk to and willing to listen to people like the same people I just mentioned. And hopefully when we have a budget that is released, we have the House and Senate budgets for next year already, but hopefully when we get one that's signed, it's something that we can all be happy with. That is a very, very quick rundown of that. All right.
Autumn or Perry, do you want to weigh in a little bit about what we've been doing or say anything extra on MEJC's or our funding committee process?
And MEJC's budget asks are on the next slides too, just so you guys know. But if, yeah, go ahead and chime in.
Do you guys want to go through process just to show people what we've been doing?
I can just say something really briefly, which is we'll start again this summer, although we have an ongoing process just to listen to all of you about what your budget priorities are for the state budget. And we've been doing a lot of research. So we do surveys and listening, and these sessions have been helpful just to hear from you all to reaffirm. And then we actually try to share those budget priorities with the governor. And then so we have different points along the year. So it's kind of an ongoing cycle, I guess. I don't know, Molly, if there's more that you want me to say, but yeah.
I wanted to chime in too, Perry. So I've been a member of MEJC. I think our organization for like maybe 10 years, but
We're founders, yeah.
But this is the first time I'm a school funding co-chair, and I really followed along with the cycle. And so a lot of times I felt intimidated, like I really didn't understand how all of this works. And being involved so closely with it really shows us like how important it is for our communities to be able to advocate and understand the budget cycle. And I hope to be, and to be connected with the MEJC partner organization. We have a few Oakland Forward members on, and we all went up to Lansing for Advocacy Day. But I think to be able to listen to what our residents and community are saying, and then being able to come to MEJC and articulate, what our people are saying, and having that get into our budget recommendations is awesome. And then to follow it up, to be able to talk to legislators one-on-one is phenomenal. And I think really it is truly a grassroots event, because we're listening to what parents and students and caregivers are talking about, and then helping to put that into legislation. So we just need more people to advocate at the city level, the school district level, all the way up to the state.
Autumn, I think that's a really good point. And, one of the things I know, this is like super complicated. These like numbers are complicated, and I will, for those who are new, like 31 AA or like at risk, but knowing these specifics actually really matter in our advocacy, because then we're like, because the legislators don't fully understand this. And so we're able to really be the experts on it. And so we do want to make sure we like are giving and making community, those most impacted, the most knowledgeable about what's happening. And those specific numbers, because we'll talk about the next thing, which is, if I can get to the next slide.
So this is when I talked about how there were people who were advocating for certain things during the budget cycle. You're going the wrong way, Molly.
I know, it won't let me go.
It's all right. Here are the things that MEJC has been asking. So 1, invest more in those 31A weights, that opportunity index that we talked about. So we would like the legislature to increase funding by 20%, which is a total of $932 million for the next year, and commit to fully funding 31A. So getting to those goal weights within 5 years, which means increasing appropriations by at least $380 million a year. So there are people pushing the legislature to hold true to what they said they would do and work towards those funding goals. And the House and the Senate did both add increases to 31A in their proposed budgets, although it was not as much as 20%.
Yeah.
The second thing, oh man, that's funny that my updates haven't shown up on your computer. The second thing is to expand access to mental health support. Stop over relying on policing in schools and allow that 31 AA money to be used on only mental health supports, not school safety. It is not as, it just isn't in line with MEJC or MLPP stance to use those funds on school safety and hiring school resource officers. We would much rather see that money used on hiring social workers, school psychs, counselors, even programs to support students in overcoming anxiety and depression and things like that. Crap, I had something else to say about that. Totally forgot.
Well, while you're thinking, one thing that's really cool about MEJC is last year there was a bucket that was specifically for school policing, section 97. And one of our asks was to move that into 31AA and restrict more of that money for mental health. And so there was a restriction for 50% of that money just to be used for mental health. And that was because of our advocacy. And then, you know, to this year's advocacy, it's really important that we keep pushing. Only the House has a 50% restriction on that money. The Senate is allowing 31AA to be used for any of those purposes. And if that goes through, in theory, a school could use all of their mental health money from 31AA just for school policing and security.
And that
So
was
there's
also
a
in
lot
the
of,
governor's budget.
exactly, and not having the restriction of 50% for mental health. So we do have in the chat, I'm gonna have Rochelle drop it again if I can't find it. And we do have it in the chat. We have a letter that if you click right now, you can send an email to every single important legislator, both in the House and Senate, saying that you support the MEJC budget asks. That includes not only the mental health money, but protecting, you can look at all of them. Lots of our other big buckets of funding, like English language learners, expanding money for school facilities. There's a lot of priorities in there. Moving more money to the 17 Black cities and students across the state. And so we'd love for you right now, if you're able, to click on that link very easily. You will send a letter with one click to the important decision makers in Lansing today. Yeah, and like Denise did, when you send it, put done. Just so we know.
Love that.
Some transparency and accountability. Put done. I want to see all the dones. Come on, y'all. This is the most important. This is a really important phase of the budget right now. They are going to have a committee between both the House and Senate to make those decisions. So please send those emails. So I want to see more dones. There's 32 people on here. I want to see at least 30 dones, or 30, maybe 28 dones, because there's a lot of you who already did it. Okay.
Yeah, go to that one that you were just at.
Yeah, I don't know why. This one?
No, the next one.
Why does it keep doing? Oh yeah, there you go. There you go.
Okay. So a lot of the questions that you guys are asking are rooted in having a good understanding of just Michigan School Funding 101. So we're kind of in the weeds a little bit more, talking about specific line items, but if you are sitting here thinking like, I wish I just had a good basic understanding of how schools are funded in the state of Michigan, have no fear. I created an awesome, beautiful fact sheet for you. If you go to mlpp.org, click on education, you will see Michigan School Funding 101. It's actually twice as long as what you see on the screen, but I couldn't fit it all on here. And it will kind of just basically explain to you how we fund schools in Michigan, and it may help you put what we talked about today into some context. I would love if the message on this beautiful little fact sheet got spread everywhere so that every Michigander knew where their tax dollars were going and had, just had all this knowledge. So please take a look at it.
And then I think we're going to turn over to Trina to talk about one more ask from MEJC. And I want to see more dones in that chat.
They're coming in.
Thank you all. And, I think that, the more and more we dig in, the more, how many folks here are feeling a little bit like frustrated or angry? after hearing some of this information today, right? And so let's do something with that, right? So it also just so happens that all of our public school districts have to pass their own budget by the end of June. Every year, this is a requirement. So our school boards in all of our school districts right now are actually finalizing what are they going to do with the 31A money, right? And now you all know what that money is, right? And so what we are hoping is that everyone on this call and lots of other folks across the state can go to your school board, go to a school board meeting in May or June, and even just ask the questions, right? Like, help me understand, right? Like Perry and Kyla, you said, we can't even figure out what the money is, right? So maybe even say, right, you don't have to rant. You just be like, hey, so where in this proposal is that 31A money? Right? Like, help us understand these buckets of money, because a lot of times these budgets are so hard to even figure out. So in the chat, I am putting, and yes, Emily, they are, because because, you know, of course, why wouldn't they be different?
Well,
Right?
one thing to know about school budgets is there's lines, and every single thing in the state budget has a number like that, like section 56, 31. So you'll see a lot of those with like A's, B's, C's throughout.
So I'm putting in the chat the link to, if you feel like you and or others in your school district can go to a school board meeting, or a lot of your school boards have finance committees. And so they're all meeting right now because they're finalizing the budgets, right? So let's get to one of those meetings and ask the questions, right? Talk about what we think are really important things to include in our budgets, right? Which includes getting clarity around, you know, what's happening with our mental health dollars, right? How are we spending that to make sure that we're actually seeing, you know, improvements? So if you are able to fill out this form, I'm going to request you do another done in the chat. Done and the school district you can commit to. And that's it for me.
And Trina, if people say they want to do it, we'll follow back up and support them based on the.
And we have a training coming up in a couple weeks that we'll make sure you're invited to, right? So you can make sure you feel like you know how to make a comment at a school board meeting if you haven't done it before.
Okay, see, we have Alyssa, you have a hand raised.
Yeah. Last year we got, and I don't know where this document came from. It was called, let's see, Estimated Fiscal Year 23-24 District Impact. And it was about, it gives all the numbers for like every district, like how much money they got from 31AA. This is from like the House Fiscal Agency. Anyway, it's hard to read, but I found that super helpful because you can find out exactly, you know, like apparently our district got, you know, $2 million in 31AA funding. So I have like an exact number. I can go in and say, hey, apparently this is about what you got last year. But I have the document. I know it came from MEJC somewhere. I don't know. Do you know what document I'm talking about?
Yeah, that was from our committee. We pulled numbers for 31AA. So I'm happy to, if you have a question this year, we can.
Well, it has a whole bunch of, it's got the bilingual education change. It's got early literacy instruction payment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the summary of the state budget once it passes.
Yeah. Well, but it lists out every single.
So then every school district, so once the state budget passes, and even in the drafts, just so folks know, they estimate out what that impact would be per school district.
Yeah.
I found it very helpful to get kind of better numbers like for our district. I know a lot of people have asked, and I know I want to send it to people, but I just have a PDF on my computer. I don't know if it's hosted somewhere or like if you guys could email out the document or.
The only trick is there are two different versions of that right now, the Senate budget and the House budget.
Well, this was just last year's. So I didn't know if we use last year's, because we can go in to this year's and be like, what'd you do? Last year you supposedly got all this money.
Absolutely.
Kind of thing.
But we can pull last year's estimates, absolutely.
Cool.
To echo that, the House and Senate Fiscal Agency websites are so helpful for stuff like this.
maybe what we can do is we can email out those links, but also just like a very quick link and that, because it's sort, is it just an Excel sheet once it gets to that level? And Trina, maybe you can incorporate that in your training.
Sure. And so I think Rochelle has our link for our evaluation for this evening.